Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. The local time is 5:47 p.m. and we'll begin a program at 6 o'clock, the top of the hour. That's about 12 minutes from now. Tonight the topic is the Columbia River Gorge. Plenty of stuff. No shortage of stuff to talk about in the Columbia River Gorge. Hello, everybody. Good. I'm glad to see we've got some comments coming in. If you're waiting for the program, you can go ahead and skip ahead 12 minutes, but for those of us who are live, we take a moment to make sure that things are working properly for us. And I hope that's the case again tonight. Looking and sounding good. That's great. 5x5. Frederick, hello. Perfect. I like to see that. Bunch of stuff scrolled by there. Didn't get a chance to see it. Oh, I should get my laptop functional. Hang on just a second. Yeah, good. If you've been with us this week, you remember that a couple nights ago we were here in the front porch talking about Glacial Lake Missoula. That one's available, as all of these are, to watch after the fact as a replay if you're interested. You can even see the live comments in replay form. Ice Age Erratics was last night and the Columbia River Gorge is tonight. I'm not going to see you tomorrow night, but Saturday morning and Sunday morning, I got some homework to do, especially with the Mima Mounds. I've never presented anything on the Mima Mounds, but we're doing it Saturday morning. It is a beautiful evening here. I mean, it could not be better outside. 68 degrees, very low wind, beautiful sun. And yet we're in the front porch because the backyard is full of ladders. The guys have begun to paint, so they've got gallons of paint everywhere. They've got drop cloths. They've got the spray gun thing. And they quit, I don't know, about a half an hour ago. And I just didn't want to say, hey, you know, can you clear all that stuff out of here? I want to set up my chalkboard. So, I mean, they work awfully hard. In fact, they didn't ask me to do this. In fact, I don't think they're even that interested in what I'm doing with all those rocks and chalkboards. They haven't even really asked. But if you're in Central Washington and you're looking for a good painter, we have been extremely pleased with Alex, Casablanca Printing. And the guy who worked on the shed for us lives in Ellensburg, Clayton, Cornerstone General Contracting. Very pleased with both of them. First time we've worked with either one of them. And by worked, I mean I sit in a lawn chair and watch them do their thing. Not really. Hello, Patrick. Patrick, you can't wait to see the paint on my house? Our house? That reminds me, Patrick. Now, if you're a longtime attendee of these live streams, you know what this is. Had a viewer suggest that I purchase one of these gizmos, and I just hit the link and ordered it. Didn't even look into it. And I used it once, I think 3 weeks ago, with the Yakima River Canyon session. And we went for a walk after the session. And I truly haven't even turned it on since then. I really honestly forgot that I had it. And I powered it up a couple hours ago. And I think I can remember how to function. I use it, so I think we should take a walk after the session tonight, if you're interested. Now, if you're on a tight schedule, I understand, but this one will probably go long because there's so much great stuff, and I want to go in the cozy fort with a few extra minutes tonight. But even if we run long, what the heck? If I can get this to work and remember what I'm doing, we'll take a little walk. Time to say hi to some more viewers here, especially if you're kids or maybe you're first-time visitors to us, really anybody. Justin, you're a familiar face, name at least. Helen, many of you are familiar, loyal people. Warhawk Me is the guy who got me rolling on the gizmo. Thank you, Warhawk Me. I had to look up your email from 3 weeks ago to figure out how to Zoom. I haven't even tried it, but I saw the video you sent, so trigger and joystick at the same time. So if we get that far, maybe I can Zoom. Grandpa Carl, huh? So have you gotten boxes like these where you need to sign? It's like, I'm 57. Yeah, you got to sign. You got to sign. You got to sign. There's alcohol in this box. So Carl from Granger, thank you very much. And Carl's with us tonight. I just saw his name. So this is a note in the box from, I think, the owner of Codin Winery. I guess that's the winery. Hang on now. Ross Camp Vineyard, Block 2, Snipes Mountain. This is south of Yakima. It's about an hour drive south of Ellensburg. Hi, Nick. Carl sends these wines, which are grown in Snipes Mountain conglomerate soils just east of the Luther Gravel Pit. If you're interested, I can send you a Google Earth view. P.S. Love your videos. So on the back, I got 2 bottles of this from Carl, so thanks again, Carl. Washington State, dedicated to making wines worthy of Washington's world-class vineyards, grown in ancestral Columbia River gravel soils, uplifted atop a sharp south-facing ridgetop. This Phelps Clone Syrah is well-structured and aromatic, aged for 20 months in neutral French oak. Ooh la la! Carl, I don't think I'm worthy of something of this high quality. In fact, I'm not worthy of most of these gifts, but here's to you and thank you for your generosity. Carl in Granger, Washington. I already snuck a sip. I've been sipping. It's delightful stuff. Thank you. And here's the other bottle that I opened up. I got my new corks from the Coopville, Whidbey Island folks last night. And while we're at it, this is an embarrassment of riches. Again, I feel I have mixed emotions about this. I'm so grateful for the generosity. I also feel embarrassed. But this arrived on the doorstep. I didn't need to sign for this one an hour ago. And the note inside is from Mount Vernon, Washington. That's up by Bellingham, Skagit River Valley, other side of the Cascades. Nick, this sign is a show of support and gratitude for your generosity in the field of geology. My son Mike made this in our shop on our new CNC router. Eastern Washington has always been a favorite place to travel and camp for our family. Now it's even more fascinating thanks to your educational videos. Thanks for sharing our state with the world. Paul. So Paul and son Mike in Mount Vernon, thank you. Look at this. It's a beautiful piece. So, I don't know what to say. I'm almost going to cry here, so better not say anything. Oh, I don't know. I'll figure out how to use it and hang it somewhere. Maybe right here, huh? All right. So thank you, Paul and Mike. Okay, I got sidetracked. Let me say hi to a couple other folks here, and I got 2 minutes. I got to get rolling here. Hello, aloha, Milton. New Zealand, hey Rob, boy, you are regular now. I got to thinking seriously about some of you in Europe in particular who are literally watching at 2 in the morning. I know that we're all kind of screwed up with our sleeping schedules with this holding pattern we've been in, but I mean, if you're setting an alarm to get up to watch at 2 or 3 in the morning, I mean, I need to send you some presents just for your dedication. But I didn't really think carefully about that, like wow. So the weekend we'll be back to our 9 a.m. Pacific time, which hopefully is a reasonable hour for some of you, where these weeknights are not. Hello, Justin, age 13. Great to see you. Jack, age 13. We got some 13-year-olds. 13, 1975. Carol Carmichael. Okay. All right. I got a minute. Thank you for joining us. I need to concentrate for a second. Well, a pleasant good evening to you all from Ellensburg, Washington, USA. Welcome to my home, our front porch for the third night in a row this week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, 6 p.m. local time. Here we are. Tonight's topic is the Columbia River Gorge, and it is a magical place for many of us. Even if you have no interest in geology, you remember the Columbia River Gorge. And for those that are watching in other distant places around the world, we'll make sure you know where we're talking about tonight. We'll make sure that we see some video clips in the Cozy Fort tonight so that you can experience some of that scenery, because it's just wonderful scenery. Forget about the geology, it's just great scenery. I mean, you're driving through that gorge and you're experiencing in a very profound way the rain shadow effect, where during an 85-mile drive, you're going from 100 inches of precipitation to less than 10. Cascade locks to the Dalles. I mean, it is crazy. The vegetation changes. You're like going from one country to the next. At least it feels like that. And as I was thinking about how I wanted to do this tonight, I first of all want to talk about why that gorge is there and possibly bust a myth or two that might be in your mind. Maybe you heard it, maybe you've even told it to people in your car as you're driving through the gorge. But I also want to make sure that we get to this list in no particular order. Now, we did have a full live stream on the Bridge of the Gods, and I'll say a few things about it tonight, but we've already covered that in gory detail, whatever live stream that was. That's the one where I lost the live stream, and I actually had a part 2 to actually finish the show, because I don't know what happened there. I'm more experienced now as a iPhone user, I guess. But there's something called Beacon Rock we'll visit, Celilo Falls. Lewis and Clark, the famous explorers, went through the gorge at a particular time. The Oregon Trail, a few decades later. Multnomah Falls, a popular place to stop. Parking lot's always jam-packed. And something called the Columbia River Highway, which is a favorite of mine, and maybe I can motivate you to get on the Columbia River Highway in pieces if you're not sure what I'm talking about. But much of that we'll go to in the Cozy Fort and kind of flesh things out. I think we need a lot of visuals tonight. That's my call. We need a lot of good visuals, and Tom Foster, who I've been talking about a lot recently, has magnificent photographs and video from the gorge. But for the uninitiated, is that a word? Uninitiated? For the folks who don't know about the gorge, let's get our bearings. He goes to the whiteboard. So, wrong whiteboard. That's good wine, Carl. All right. So here's my best attempt to not only locate ourselves with the Columbia Gorge, but also use some concepts we've been working on earlier this week and even a couple weeks ago. So I'll give you a chance to kind of soak this in. You can see Ellensburg. You can see the drive up and over the mountains to Seattle. So the red are the Cascade volcanoes and the Cascade Mountains. And it is a formidable mountain range. It's tough to get over the Cascades. And you can do it at Snoqualmie Pass or Stevens Pass or Washington Pass, Rainy Pass. You can go down to White Pass or Chinook Pass, or down into Oregon at some of those passes, which I'm less familiar with. But there's really only one place you can drive through the Cascades, and that's our topic tonight. The Columbia River Gorge is the only place you can actually go right through the range. You don't do any climbing at all. And we have 2 kids living in Western Oregon currently, one in Portland and one down in Eugene. The Eugene guy is the baby. He's the guy that was in Montana on Tuesday. Now he's currently down at the University of Oregon. But the point is, when you do that drive, whether it's frequently or infrequently, you don't really forget it. And all the stuff on my list is right here in this little gorge. So it's more than just a regular river gorge. There's all these individual little features that have their own stories to tell. But the overriding question I want to ask here, and maybe you can guess it, maybe you're already ahead of me here. My basic question is, did the Ice Age floods that we've been talking about the last few nights, those were powerful floods. We're draining Glacial Lake Missoula in a hurry, and all that water is racing over eastern Washington. What's the myth? Did the Missoula floods blast a hole through the Cascade Mountains to make the gorge? They were powerful floods, and they did have a lot of power. I guess that's why they're called powerful floods. But I'm not going to let that dangle. The answer is no, absolutely not, for sure not. The Columbia River Gorge was a thing for millions of years before the Missoula floods. And so as soon as we get to talking about Multnomah Falls, we have these amazing waterfalls, you're like, oh yeah, those were carved by the Ice Age floods. No, I don't think so. It's more than just me. I take my cue from Jim O'Connor, who is the leading geologist for the Columbia River Gorge. He's my age. He's been at it a long time. And his concept is the floods came through the gorge for sure. All the Ice Age floods. I don't care if you've got water coming from Montana or British Columbia. Some of you wanted British Columbia water the other night. Fine. even the Bonneville flood coming from Salt Lake. All of that Ice Age floodwater, every drop of Ice Age floodwater came through the Columbia River Gorge. But it did not carve the gorge. And it didn't even make directly those steep cliffs on the Oregon side to make the waterfalls. Instead, O'Connor's view, based on his evidence he's been able to work with over the years, is that the Missoula floods may have undercut some of the slopes and caused landslides to therefore have these steep walls in the gorge. But even that simple message of the Ice Age floods scoured and eroded and made these steep cliffs that Multnomah Falls and those other waterfalls are falling over, not really the story. So before we leave this concept of this big broad area, I want to try to give you the evidence that we have that that's true. That the Columbia River Gorge is an old feature. It existed pretty much in present day form. And then all these floods come through, they decorate the gorge, they definitely leave a bunch of deposits, but they don't actually do the carving itself. That was a little more than I wanted to do on the Ice Age floods, but now that I've done it, I think I want to go to the other whiteboard, which I mistakenly went to a second ago. Here's one piece of evidence to try to convince you that the floods did not do all of this massive carving through the Cascades. And this is, again, this is all stuff I read. This is stuff I get email replies from many of these leading geologists, and they say, look, this is an important concept in the gorge, in the Columbia Gorge. The water is flowing. We're talking about an Ice Age flood now, okay? One of our floods from earlier this week, bringing the ice rafted erratics and all that stuff, right? So here's Lake Lewis, Tri-Cities. Here's Wallula Gap. And the main point is, once that water gets through Wallula Gap, it doesn't just pick up speed that goes 60 miles an hour and races to the ocean, which is kind of the impression I probably gave you in previous Ice Age floods talks here in the front porch or the backyard. Like once this water, which has been waiting patiently to thread through the needle here, it picks up speed for sure. Each of these blue arrows is where we have fast water. And where we have fast water, the water is cutting. It's digging deep potholes. It's making scablands in the floor of the Columbia River Gorge. And Celilo Falls, which we'll visit by video, is a classic place where we have some of the Ice Age floodwater digging into the floor of the Columbia River Gorge. But my main point is, we have these choke points. These places where the Columbia River Gorge was narrow then during the Ice Age, and it's still narrow. There's a place just downstream of the Dalles. There's a place at Bridge of the Gods. There's Wallula Gap. And there's another one where you're just downstream of Portland and things get narrow again. So think of these narrow places as not only where the water's moving fast because it's finally squeezing through and threading the needle through that bottleneck, but here's the most important point. If your floodwater that's coming through the gorge and you're approaching one of these narrow spots, that water's going to stop. So if you've heard of Lake Condon is just simply another backup of water, just like Lake Lewis was. It's not really a lake that exists there for centuries. It's just water that is spreading out in this next open area because we have another choke point a little bit downstream. And another choke point, and even this choke point explains why we had so much slack water going all the way down to where Jack Zentner lives in Eugene. So I didn't have that concept of narrow and wide, choke points and kind of slack water, and having us understand why various spots within the gorge look the way they do. So when we actually slow the water, and even stop the water, we're laying down gravel bars. Let me say that differently. Where we slow the water or stop the water, we have some slack water sediments. We have some ice rafted erratics on the margins. And many of these gravel bars are deposited immediately downstream from the choke points themselves. And with Tom's video, you'll see some of those amazing gravel bars. So there's kind of an interesting parallel to what we were doing on Tuesday night with the floor of Glacial Lake Missoula. where we're draining all that water quickly, and there were choke points. Do you remember, if you were with us on Tuesday, there were choke points and places where we had big gravel bars just downstream of the choke points. Same story even in the Columbia River Gorge. So this is not freeway speed water coming all the way through the gorge. Therefore, this is one piece of evidence to say the floods didn't carve the gorge. The other, more conventional way to try to help people see how the gorge is for sure millions of years older than the Ice Age is to look more carefully at the walls of the Columbia River Gorge itself. And from this map, you would say, oh, okay, well, if I look at the walls of the Columbia Gorge, that must be in a bunch of Cascade rocks that I can look at. A bunch of mud flows, a bunch of Cascade lavas, maybe some andesites and diorites. But it's not true. Do you know what kind of rock is in the walls of the Columbia River Gorge? Can you believe it? Can you believe it's the German chocolate cake again? Those flood basalts make up the walls of the Columbia Gorge. So yes, there's lava layers in the walls of the Columbia River Gorge between the Dalles and Portland, but they're not Cascade lavas. They're lavas that came from eastern Washington. We've seen this many times. This is the main phase of the German chocolate cake building, where we have these deep cracks in eastern Washington, and these lavas are flowing west. And in general, we're screwing up the position of the Columbia River. We've got these blonde quartzite cobbles, just like where the wine is coming from tonight in Snipes Mountain. Okay? But with some of the individual flows that came late, look carefully now. Here's the Priest Rapids lava flow that's coming out of a fissure in eastern Washington. And here's the lava in orange. And notice it's getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And then it comes down to a very thin worm. And that lava is still there. I almost want to draw it, but I don't think I want to take the time to do it. This Priest Rapids lava is where the Vista House is located today. And in other words, I'll do it just verbally, this lava flow followed the Columbia River Valley, filled the Columbia River Valley with lava, things eroded on opposite sides of the Priest Rapids lava flow, and the only thing that's high now is the thing that used to be the open space where the gorge was. I don't know if that works for you or not. But the point is we have these lavas that are flowing into some kind of river valley. But look at this. Here's the Ginko lava flow. The crack is at Moses Lake, and the lava is flowing. This is the one that had all the petrified forest trees at the bottom of it. Do you remember? That was another live stream. We've been at this a while. Here's the Ginko flow, pretty wide, coming through this area. And then please note that these Columbia River lavas in the age of the Ginko is actually crossing not only kind of through the Cascades or over the Cascades, but also getting to the Oregon coast. And so the coast range must not have been very big at the time. So this is flirting with the idea of the gorge being much older than the Ice Age, but I've got something even more specific to help you see the age relation between the giant lavas of the German chocolate cake, the Columbia River, and the age of the actual gorge. One piece of paper, drew it 20 minutes ago, maybe it'll work for you. So let's start with today. Today, here's the gorge. We're driving down the river, heading to visit the kids in Portland or Eugene. And in eastern Washington, so this is eastern Washington and western Washington. Did you notice on our map, outsiders? This gorge is actually on the state line. So this is all Washington north, and this is all Oregon down here. So this Columbia River Gorge and the Columbia River in this location actually makes the state boundary. But I'm choosing to pick Washington because I'm a Washington guy. So here we go. We're driving on the scenic State Route 14, I think it is, on the Washington side. That's my preference, instead of being on the Oregon side with the fast traffic. And so we're going through these little dinky towns, and we're going downriver. And when we start the drive in eastern Washington, if we look carefully, and you'll see some beautiful photos in a second, we have our massive, giant lava flows, 3 of the many, many lava flows of the German chocolate cake. Here's the observation that's important. Let's just pick these 3. These 3 giant lava flows, which are grand round in age, 16 million years old, maintain their thickness up and over this massive anticline. So the Cascades are a big old geologic fold, and we have even older layers than the lavas called the Eagle Creek Formation that are exposed in the core of the Cascades. But my point is, these layers are just as thick here as they are in the Cascades as they are over here. So that tells us that the Cascades were not present when these lava flows came into the area. In fact, geologically, because of that, maintaining that thickness of these massive lava flows, we go back 16 million years in our mind and say, okay, well, the only way to make sense for these lava flows to maintain their thickness all the way to the Oregon coast is to have it be a flat trip. Otherwise, those giant lava flows would pinch out to nothing, wouldn't they? They'd pond up against the mountain range. So in case I'm losing you, here's the idea. Massive lava flows 16 million years ago. No Cascades, at least in this area. It's a broad, open valley that we can cross through. Maybe it's 60 miles wide instead of the narrow Columbia River Gorge that we have today. Then we do what? We have the Columbia River get established, and then we fold the rock layers. The river is older than the Cascade uplift, and that's true as well for the ridges that are especially on the Washington side of the Columbia River Gorge. Many of you have noticed, I'm sure, these layers that are all beautifully tilted on the Washington side. You've done that drive? I don't care if you're going east or you're going west. It's probably more visible if you're going east, actually. You're driving upriver, and you look on your left on the Washington side, and you've got these crazy bedrock layers. I get asked about it all the time. People who wouldn't have a geologic thought if it was required of them at gunpoint. They even notice these massive flat irons on the Washington side. Well, the river was there first, and those tilted layers tilted after the river got established. Now, does that sound familiar? That's the story with the Yakima River Canyon. That's the story with many of the river canyons in the Pacific Northwest. The river gets established first, and then the ridges grow after that. So if you want to put a fine point on it, and I guess I do right now, the Cascades existed, but in kind of a low form going back tens of millions of years. But the fact that these lavas, these giant lavas, are crossing over the Cascades tell us that the high Cascades that we have now, these crazy uplifted anticlines in the Cascades, that massive uplift to form the Cascades as we know them today, that's recent. And the general rule I use in my teaching, maybe it's a slight exaggeration, I think it's close though, 3,000 feet of uplift in 3 million years. There's a very aggressive, intense uplift of the rocks in the Cascades, including these rock layers here, a massive, intense uplift of the Cascades in the last 3 million years, and we lifted those originally flat, uniform thickness lava flows 3,000 feet in the core of the Cascades. Okay? So hopefully that feels comfortable to you. Basic relations, and we have evidence now, both from the choke points and from the bedrock in the walls of the Columbia River Gorge. None of us are saying, are we now, that the Cascades were, a beautiful big mountain range for millions and millions of years, and then here comes the Ice Age floods, and they just punch a hole right through. There's no evidence for that. All the evidence suggests the opposite of that story. Okay, how are we doing? We feeling okay? 825 people, okay? The other thing I want to do with you, and it might be a surprise to you, is talk about J. Harlen Bretz. Now, we've had a live stream called J. Harlen Bretz. That was a couple weeks ago in the backyard. We had another one the next night on Grand Coulee. Grand Coulee, but it was mostly just talking more about J. Harlen Bretz. So Bretz is famous around the world, in geology at least, probably broad sciences. He's famous for being a very complete field geologist who was not accepted among other geologists until his 9th decade on this planet. Finally, in his 80s and his 90s, he was embraced as a savant, essentially, as a field mapper in the 1920s. So why are we talking about him tonight? Because many people are not aware, and I only had a faint idea until recently, that J. Harlen Bretz was teaching graduate students in the Columbia River Gorge before he ever set foot in eastern Washington to do his most famous work. And what he was able to find with his students in the gorge we were just talking about got him properly teased enough to work his way east. And then by the time he started doing field work for real out in eastern Washington, the table was set. He was ready to go. So he didn't just, get off the train in Spokane in 1922 blindfolded and just blindfold us off. He's like, well, what do we have here? He had all these clues from downstream in the Columbia Gorge years prior, and he had some help by the Spokane high school teachers, which I've talked about probably too much. So let me give you some articles, photos, concepts to help you see that Bretz has his fingerprints all over the Columbia River Gorge starting in 1914. So for those unaware, here's what J. Harlen, he was born Harley Bretz. He made up the J, he made up the Harlen. So here's Harley. Albion College graduation back in Michigan. Here he is working at the University of Chicago. Here he is in retirement, finally embraced as the hero that he is. If you know about the Missoula floods, you know a map that looks like this. Glacial Lake Missoula, Glacial Lake Columbia, blah, 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 blah. We've been doing it for a long time now in these live streams. Here's all the water, here's all the kitchen flour, here's all the redeposited silt in making Lake Lewis, here's the water draining down into the Columbia River Gorge, here's a bunch of that slack water going down to Eugene, and there's the water getting out to the ocean. We're talking about this portion of the story tonight. And in case you didn't hear me a second ago, here's the story again. Bretz mapped here for at least 3 field seasons, basically during the years of World War I. He was with 2 or 3 University of Chicago grad students. They took the train out for a summer field season. He had his 5 or 6 weeks that he was teaching students, but they were mapping together. They were walking. It's 1913, 1914, 1915, 1916, etc. They're jumping onto trains, they're going up to the next station, they're getting off, they're walking and mapping and camping, and they have a cook in their little party. And Bretz was able to find all sorts of weird stuff in the gorge to get him like, what is going on upstream? Okay, well, what was he finding? This is flashing forward a little bit later. This is an early map of Bretz, by Bretz, in 1925. So this is after a couple of field seasons in the channeled scablands, but notice he doesn't have any connection to Montana. All he's doing in 1925 is creating maps that show the channeled scablands of eastern Washington. And he's got this stuff mapped from some of his work prior to ever getting up there. Now, I've said that 3 different times, so I won't say it again, I promise. Out of all the scientific papers that Bretz published, He only regretted one, and it's this one, from his work in the Columbia River Gorge. He was finding so much weird stuff that he had an idea of submerged crust in the Columbia Gorge, upstream of the Columbia River Gorge, downstream of the Columbia River Gorge. It wasn't his idea originally. Thomas Condon back in the 1880s had it, then I.C. Russell had it. But Bretz was the first to map, wait for it, ice-rafted erratics. And he kept finding these ice-rafted erratics, and he kept finding them and kept walking to the next one and plotting these location of these ice-rafted erratics, which led Bretz to publish this report in 1919 after his few seasons in the Columbia Gorge. And he had this publication of a submerged crust, meaning he has evidence of hundreds of feet of water, but all he's got in his mind is a lake. He's like, why do I have all this standing water in the gorge, upstream and downstream of the gorge? And I know I got water because I've got these erratics that are up on these hill slopes. We had icebergs. That was Bretz making that call. And he got curious enough. Is that a word? Curiouser and curiouser? I always hear that and think, is that really the right way to say that? He got very curious. And he started walking with his students upstream. Here's a photo that Bretz took in 1918 at Prosser, Washington. Beautiful erratic, just like what we had last night. So in other words, he found these erratics in the gorge. He found them down by Eugene. And he starts marching an incredible distance. I don't think this is all one field season. But let me just give you a quick roll call. I'm searching now. Well, here's his hand-drawn map in 1919. Remember now, this is 4 to 5 years before he ever even starts thinking about the Ice Age floods. Like, he knows nothing about Eastern Washington. But yet he's got a map that looks like this. It looks very familiar to a map we have today. Here's the Willamette Valley underwater. Here's the Columbia Gorge. Here's all this water. But he's in his paper here, this is why he regrets the paper. He's like, I guess the crust was like low and like a bunch of water just like ponded. Another idea was maybe we had a bunch of water in Lake Lewis. They actually called it Lake Lewis at the time before they knew about the Ice Age floods. Maybe Lake Lewis and like Lake Condon are there because maybe there was a glacier that was sitting in the heart of the Columbia River Gorge and just blocking the Columbia River for a long time. So that was an idea for a while. But anyway, this is Bretz, hand drawing this in 1918, and the war is coming to a close and all that. But if I can find this, this is the fun part for me, because he's got a little diary, essentially, of all these erratics that they found and how much ground they traveled. And again, you're not driving. Oh, come on. Where is this? Hold it. Yeah. Oh, it was on that same map. I don't know. If the focus is well, it's probably easier just to show you. It includes Granger, by the way, Carl. So here are the locations that Bretz visited with students. He found erratics at every one of these locations. Carefully marked their elevation, carefully logged in his notebook the kind of rock, and he correctly deduced that they were ice-rafted erratics. He didn't know where the glacier came. He doesn't know where the glacier was. He didn't know why all the water was there. And of course, we now know it's water from Montana, and the ice dam was in northern Idaho. So just in case that focus was junk, Prosser, Mabden, Sunnyside, Granger, Toppenish, Yakima, Bretz on foot, without ever being in the Grand Coulee, is up at Priest Rapids. He's at Burke, Quincy, Winchester, Ephrata, Soap Lake, Adrian. Really amazing stuff. I didn't really know that until recently. I want to do a couple other things. things to set us up for the Cozy Fort, and I'm going quickly to the Cozy Fort as quickly as I can because the video that Tom Foster made on the Columbia River Gorge is 22 minutes long, and he did it in the same spring that he made that Glacial Lake Missoula episode that we saw a couple nights ago. It's probably not an accident he burnt out on this whole thing after those two crazy long projects. But I thought our Missoula show was our best, mainly because of the stuff that my spin on it. I thought I was happy with that. This Columbia River Gorge show, it's all Tom. And it's just one priceless photo after another, and homemade animations, and some maps that he created. So I want to spend more than just a couple minutes with his Columbia River Gorge video. 22 minutes long. I think it's on an endless loop at the Discovery Center down by the Dalles. But something I tried to do quickly with our live stream on the Bridge of the Gods, but I don't think I did it very well. Here's why. You know what? I want to do the other one. So I'm in Roadside Geology of Oregon by Marley, and she had a beautiful illustrations talking about why there's waterfalls on the Oregon side and not on the Washington side, but she wanted to improve it. And I won't say why, it's better. She improved it with the Washington book. So what you're looking at, yes, you're looking upstream right now. So Oregon's on your, shit. Yeah. Washington's on your left and Oregon's on your right. And the reason that we have all these waterfalls on the Oregon side and not on the Washington side is the dipping of the rock layers. And many of these are the Columbia basalt lavas, but there's also some sands and some mud layers that are particularly slippery. And those same layers are dipping to the south on the Oregon side. So here comes some rivers out of the Cascades. Then suddenly they have a huge wall to fall over because the layers are dipping to the south. Yes, there's been some landslides a little bit on this side, but for the most part, it's major landslides on the Washington side, including the Bridge of the Gods landslide, otherwise known as the Bonneville Landslide, on the Washington side. What's here? It's like a little grab bag of things I wanted to dog tag. This is from a book that Eric Cheney, retired UW geology professor, put together. It's a bunch of scientific papers that are compiled. This came out just a few years ago. And in this book by Eric Cheney, edited by Eric Cheney, is another of Stev Ominski's paintings. I was talking about Stev last night. But here's Stev giving us a visual of what it may have looked like if you were standing at Crown Point on the Oregon side looking up the river and you're like, oh blank, what's coming down this gorge? And the answer is one of the Ice Age floods that Bretz eventually was able to document a few years after making those discoveries in the Columbia River Gorge itself. Stev Ominski helping us visualize details. And I gotten a bunch of questions after, I guess it was after last night's, about Native Americans. Do we think there were some very tragic moments in the Columbia River Gorge or in the Grand Coulee or any place where these floods were crashing through? And the short answer is yes. Our oldest archaeological sites and our youngest Ice Age flood deposits are starting to overlap in ages. So we have people here. We don't yet have one direct town site, let's say, village site, Native American settlement, and then Ice Age flood deposits, running over the camp or something like that. But it seems likely that in the next generation or two, we will have that evidence to prove that there was tragedy. Makes me sad just thinking about it. like this. This is, I showed you last night when Evelyn asked about Wallula Gap, and here's all this backed up Missoula floodwater, and much of it, think of all the water coming through Wallula Gap itself. This is just the top, and the iceberg's floating as that water's coming down. We're filling the entire Columbia River Gorge with water. One last tidbit, and then we're going to go to the Cozy Fort. It pays to kind of be a public person these days, because you hear from people who don't know you, but they have things that they want to share. And some of it's, you know, I've got a piece of property, you might want to come out and look. We've got some really interesting stuff. In this case, I heard from a guy last fall from Seattle who said, I interviewed J. Harlen Bretz's son. I flew down there. J. Harlen Bretz's son was named Rudy. And Rudy was working in Los Angeles. And they did an interview, a video interview with Rudy Bretz. And Rudy was talking about memories of his dad and travels out to the Pacific Northwest when they first owned their car in 1925 and that sort of thing. Anyway, Rudy went on not to be a geologist, but to be a author of science books for children, and was quite successful apparently. And so I found this online, an original copy, How the Earth is Changing, just one of the many books by Rudolph Bretz, J. Harlen Bretz's son. This was from the Maplewood School, District Number 6, Greeley, Colorado. But Rudy was not only writing these books, but he was illustrating them. So there was this interesting kind of passing on of landscapes and interest in history and interest in science, but as many cases, the child wants to have their own spin on what's going on. So this exists, and on my YouTube channel that I guess many of you are subscribed to, there's the original long interview with Rudy Bretz that this gentleman gave me a copy, and it's long and it's out of focus half the time, and it's not that great, but you can actually hear Harley Bretz's kid if you want to. Okay, Bijou's in the house. He's done playing outside. It's time for the Cozy Fort to watch a couple of things. And Cozy Fort by Steve, trademark. And I'm ready to sweat. Sweating to the oldies. And I hope you enjoy this extended session in the Cozy Fort this evening. And if you're new to us, you're like, I don't understand what we're doing. But you will soon enough, through trial and error. Okay, this first clip is me talking into my laptop and eventually talking to you. I published a draft of a new J. Harlen Bretz lecture that I was putting together. I was looking for feedback, and I'd gotten a lot of help from authors and geologists and others that knew parts of the early Bretz story. I was interested in Bretz before he got out to Eastern Washington. I wanted to know, who was this guy? And I'm still hoping to give that lecture live in downtown. So eventually you'll see it on YouTube, I hope, at some point. Damn, that's good wine, Carl. But I don't want to show you much of that draft, except I want to show you the part about Bretz in the Gorge. And Eric Lindstrom and John Sonicson and Brian McDonald have been researching much of what they can. And Brian McDonald have been... This trouble every time. I want to make sure the volume's up as high as I can get it. So this is maybe 5 minutes of me talking to you, but focusing on Bretz in the gorge with some Tom Foster photos superimposed. Enjoy. A little bit more connected to Bretz from my point of view. There's amazing archival information, all of Bretz's notebooks, etc., at the University of Chicago Library. And you can piece together the details. And there's a gentleman working on a new biography of Bretz in his early days, and I'm hoping that this recorded lecture will motivate him to get back to that project. Bretz does return to the Pacific Northwest, of course, because we haven't even gotten to the channeled scablands yet. But in addition to that undergraduate field mapping course, Bretz decides with 3 grad students every summer, he's going to spend an average of about 4 weeks out here, maybe 6 weeks out here. Can you hear that? Pacific Northwest. I can't get any louder. And based on some scientific papers that had come out in the late 1800s by Thomas Condon and a few others, Russell, he went to the Columbia River Gorge. Thank you. And every summer he would take just a handful of students. They'd come out on the train, and they'd go to Portland, and they'd start doing geology, and Bretz would be teaching them geologic mapping and reasoning in the Columbia River Gorge. And that was an exciting time. Now we're into 19 teens, and a brand new highway was being constructed on the Oregon side of the Columbia River Highway. And guess who wrote the first roadside geology book that I'm aware of? It's Bretz with Ira Williams. Bretz is acknowledged in the acknowledgments, but his fingerprints are all over this roadside geology guide. A bestseller apparently in 1915, and they had a second reprinting a few years later. But Bretz and his students are mapping carefully the Columbia River basalt lavas, some fossilized beds deep in the gorge, many other kinds of things. Here's some hand-drawn cross-sections from Bretz and Williams. And that highway is still there, by the way, in sections. And I encourage you next time you drive through the gorge to spend a few extra minutes and find these beautiful old bridges and these old roadways that must have been tremendously exciting with automobiles coming of age in 1915 and taking your family up that road and learning some geology along the way. And the Vista House from that era when the road opened in 1915. Well, I find this chapter interesting of Bretz's life because he's noticing things in the gorge that don't make sense. So he's away from his dissertation topic. He's now in the Columbia Gorge, but he's noticing things that might have some sort of Pleistocene signature. For instance, why are the walls of the Columbia Gorge so different in the bottom half than the top half? It's almost like you could draw a line, Bretz is saying to himself. There's some sort of erosion of the walls in the lower 2/3, let's say, instead of half. And he starts finding these incredible boulders of granite and other light-colored minerals that clearly were moved in. But why were they dropped so high on the walls of the gorge? Why weren't they, if they were carried in, why aren't they down in the bottom of the gorge? Why are they up so high? And so a surprise to me, and maybe to you, is that before Bretz ever set foot in eastern Washington, he was in the gorge mapping those boulders and with grad students, and they started walking. All right, we know that. I suppose jumping trains into eastern Washington. Apparently I was sedated that morning. So you might have to turn your volume back down. Maybe you already have. So I think the other clip, and it's more than 5 minutes now. I'm happy to perspire into my shirt just to make sure you get a chance to see this if you haven't seen this. This is Tom Foster at his best in a video just simply called Columbia River Gorge. It's on YouTube, and I'm not going to show you all 22 minutes. You don't need that. But there's a segment in the middle where Tom is using the pace of his visuals. And again, to me, the visuals are the whole thing with this gorge. I don't know if you found tonight's topic particularly interesting, but if you can take those ideas and then plug them right into all this beauty and all this variety and all this human history, it just brings the whole place to life. And it was one of Tom's favorite places, to the point where he said, don't make it, I know you're working with those Central guys, don't make a program on the gorge. Okay, that's us. I got all these great photos. I wanna do it right. And so he definitely did it right. So strap in. I got it cranked volume-wise. And do I? Yes, I do. I'm guessing 6 or 7, maybe even 8 minutes of this, if my arms can hold for that long. Ready? Let's do it. Reverse and thrust faults. They all formed from crustal squeezing, warps and cracks in the crust that formed after the Columbia River was established here. You want proof? The Columbia River makes an abrupt turn at Rowena and cuts right through the Columbia Hills anticline. Perfect. You can't do that unless the river was here first and the ridges came second. In the middle of the Dalles syncline, a broad downfold, volcanic mud flows of the Dalles Formation are preserved. It's not all basalt around here. But here's a key point. The Yakima folds and faults have made narrow constrictions for the river to flow through. Wallula Gap was not the only choke point for the floods on their way to the Pacific. Many prominent valley constrictions exerted significant control on the Ice Age flood hydraulics. Wallula Gap, Rowena Gap, Bingen Gap, Crown Point. The water accelerated to 60 miles per hour at these bottlenecks, but just downstream from each constriction, giant flood bars composed of loose rocks that the floods dropped as the water spread and slowed. Those are the green dots on our map. The whole town of Lisle, Washington sits on a flood bar downstream of Rowena Gap. Green dots. The bar used to extend across the mouth of the Klickitat River. The Mosier flood bar sits where Ice Age floodwater diverted up a side valve. The town of Bingen sits on a huge flood bar downstream of Bingen Gap. And on an even larger scale, much of East Portland sits on a huge Ice Age flood bar downstream of Crown Point. Now, for all those questions about specific attractions in the gorge, iconic images of Native Americans harvesting and processing salmon at Celilo Falls. Where can I find those falls, you say? Before they closed the gates on the Dalles Dam in 1956, Celilo Falls was a majestic place. When the river was low, Celilo had a sheer drop of 18 feet. In the reach downstream, narrow chutes were separated by large holes in the river bottom. Holes 130 feet deep, drilled by the Ice Age floods. That's 100 feet below sea level. The set of rapids, the Dalles of the Columbia, dropped the river 80 feet in 12 miles, and immense salmon runs fought their way up through the falls and chutes. Celilo Falls is no more, buried under still water behind the Dalles Dam. Downstream, where the river passes through the center of the Cascades, there's a very different reason that the river is choked down. Every photo is Tom's. Lewis and Clark in 1805 took note of large stands of partially submerged tree stumps. Except that one. A submerged forest of the Columbia. Trees up to 25 feet tall. Thousands of drowned stumps upriver as far as the Dalles. And Lewis and Clark were about to encounter a set of rocky rapids here. The Great Chute, they called it. The Cascades of the Columbia. In this same spot, Native Americans spoke of a bridge of the gods, a legend of river crossing without getting feet wet, and not an ancient legend. Fathers voyaging upriver in their canoes without obstruction as far as the Dalles of the Columbia. What happened here? You know the answer. An enormous landslide. Thank you. The Bonneville Landslide. part of the Washington side of the gorge slid down and buried the Columbia River channel with 300 feet of loose rock.
Great photo.
The slide pushed the river a mile south towards Oregon, making the landslide dam 3 times higher than today's Bonneville Dam.
He had to hike up
And
to get
above
that
the
photo.
slide, impressive cliffs. The headscarp of the slide where the mountains split. Upstream of the slide, the river rose 40 feet. The Lake of the Gods extended tens of miles upstream. Today's Skamania Lodge would have been lakeshore property. The lake eventually overtopped the rock blockage and drained. After cutting a passage through the slide down to its current bed, the rapids first made their appearance. Lewis and Clark's Great Chute Rapids? Boulders from the toe of the Bonneville Landslide, rocks too big for the river to flush through the gorge. Later in the 1800s, locks were built to negotiate the rapids, the landslide blocks. Today, the rapids, as well as most of the Cascades locks and canal, are underwater, drowned in 1938 by the reservoir behind Bonneville Dam. So what's the age of the Bonneville Slide? It was before Lewis and Clark, right? Before 1805?
Okay, we did
Maybe
that.
the slide was triggered by the great magnitude 9 earthquake.
I'm going to skip ahead. We talked about in a live stream all the evidence we have for that landslide being between the year 1425 and 1450, and that's a couple of decades before Lewis and Clark. More than a couple decades, a couple of centuries before Lewis and Clark. I want to show you one more little segment, again featuring Tom's outstanding work. Think of how much time, I don't want to do too much on Tom, but it's too late. He spent, I don't know how many trips down there getting all those photos. I think just for his own enjoyment. I don't think he was planning on making a video, but after, years and years of hiking and taking photos and going back and taking them again, and then finding all this footage online and then putting it all together, gosh, I kept saying how amazing he was, and he kind of listened, but he was even more embarrassed with that stuff than I am. Okay, one more segment from Tom, this time getting into Beacon Rock, and then a little bit of that historic Columbia River Highway that Bretz wrote that roadside geology book for.
Continuing downstream, another familiar landmark, Beacon Rock. Hey, is this one of those inter-canyon flows? No. Beacon Rock is an 850-foot-high remnant of an eroded volcanic neck that's only 57,000 years old. Think today's Lava Butte in central Oregon, a volcano that formed in the middle of the river. Lava would dam the river on occasion, but the volcano was no match for the river. And back in the early 1900s, Henry Biddle built steps to the top. Walk your family up the center of a volcano. The glorious waterfalls in the gorge, Multnomah Falls and others. Why are there so many here? They are primarily the result of Ice Age cutting by the Columbia River against the uplifting Cascade Range. The gorge cutting prompted landslides from the Washington side to push the river to the south side of the gorge, which repeatedly undercut thick, stubborn, older Columbia River basalts. The Ice Age flood swept through the gorge on occasion to clean up the walls, but the waterfalls are really a direct result of tectonic uplift. After all of this geologic history, and after Lewis and Clark, European-based settlers began arriving. The Oregon Trail approached the gorge from the east, and the old Moody Road was a primary route along the southern edge of the Columbia River.
That's a cool road if you haven't been on that. It's a gravel road on the Oregon side.
A giant obstacle. How to proceed? The wagon trains decided, well, are we going to get wet by following the river? Or are we going to stay dry by climbing up and over the Cascades near Mount Hood? The Dalles up ahead became a major stop for the Oregon Trail travelers to ponder that question. Decades after the Oregon Trail, early steamboats cruised up and down the river. And then in 1915, the first successful highway to cross through the Cascade Range, the Columbia River Highway, was constructed to harmonize with the beauty of the gorge.
graceful sets of curves separated by viaducts, bridges, tunnels, all faced with natural stone worked by European masons. A brand new vista house presided over an amazing landscape suddenly accessible by automobile. With the grand opening of the highway in 1915, a young geologist, Harlen Bretz, was hired to write a roadside geology guidebook. His first taste of deposits and landforms that got him thinking for the first time about huge floods of water from a then unknown source. A controversial topic that initially brought him scorn and ridicule, but eventually brought him fame and acceptance worldwide. Of course, the wild Columbia River was tamed in the 20th century to harness the power of the river. A continuous string of reservoirs ending at tidewater at the foot of Bonneville Dam. Today, the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area, with the Discovery Center in its hub, is famous for its hundreds of hiking trails and gorgeous wildflowers. The National Scenic Area designation allows for preserving the scenic quality by regulating land use and development and through property acquisition.
We just made the video and just gave it to
All of
him.
this geology has forced barges, salmon, railroads, and highways through this narrow slot through the Cascades. Geologist Jim O'Connor has devoted many years to advancing our understanding of the geology of the Columbia River Gorge, and his work is not done. By dating various young lavas that came into the gorge at various elevations, like the pillows in the freeway road cut just west of Hood River, we can improve our grasp of the timing of the Cascades uplift and the river's downcutting. More work is also needed on the history of river blockages here. So many lava dams and landslide dams through the history of the gorge. How did those blockages affect ancient fish populations? Stay tuned. Like all branches of the sciences, there are always new questions that geologists will work to answer. An awe-inspiring place, the Columbia River Gorge, a beautiful geologic laboratory for all to enjoy.
All right, thanks for your patience. That was more than we normally do, but as you heard me say, you need to see that place to have extra motivation to learn the geology behind it. And it's a special place. It's time for your questions. Let me get the laptop fired up. Let me get the cozy fort put away. Liz is out gardening. We're losing the sun back behind the ridge, but we still have time for a walk. But I definitely want to do some Q&A with you. Let's do it. So glad that so many of you are still with us. That didn't run you off. That's good. Okay, a fast-paced Q&A. He pops out the chat, ladies and gentlemen. He pops it right out like a boss. He just pops it out. He scrolls back. 2 fingers, yo. Nick, have you ever seen a hole-in-the-wall falls in the gorge? Hole-in-the-wall falls. I don't think I have. I'm not a huge crowds guy, so I don't seem to catch that place when it's relatively sparse with people. So it's a cool area with all those waterfalls. I don't know that one. Was Columbia named after someone, something, or what? I don't know the history of that. Evelyn, age 7, if the Columbia River is so much older, why isn't it as curvy as the Yakima? Evelyn? Will you be writing a scientific paper anytime soon? I don't mean just like for school. I mean like a professional paper. Because your questions are absolutely inspiring. The Columbia River is curvy in places, but certainly not as curvy as the Yakima River. And it's difficult to explain that, Evelyn.
my attempt to explain it is that there has been a series of uplift events over tens of millions of years where those Cascade Mountains are. So the Columbia wasn't allowed to lazily go back and forth because there was a little bit more activity there with the crust versus central Washington. Thank you for the question, Evelyn, age 7. How high did Lake Condon get? Did the Missoula floods wash into Goldendale? Charlie, thanks for the question. I don't know the number off the top of my head. Now, the high water mark for Lake Lewis, which was the next lake upstream from Lake Condon, you know what? No, I don't have a good way to find the number easily. So Charlie's asking about, is this lake about the same elevation as this lake? And without knowing more than I do, I'll just say roughly 1250 elevation. And I think now that I say that, I'm remembering when we wrote that script, I think maybe the high water mark descends a bit as we go downstream, and that kind of makes sense. But there are some peculiar deposits in the Goldendale area. So I think I know where you're headed with your line of questioning, and maybe you live in the Goldendale area or by the Bluebird houses or over to Bickleton or whatever. It's easy to get confused between Ice Age deposits, which we're talking about right now, and river rocks from when the old Columbia River used to come through your area more than 10 million years ago. But I don't have a specific number for you, sorry. Jeff, I am moving to White Salmon this month. More of a comment, really, Jeff. Thank you for sharing. Are you saying the Columbia was there when the basalt flowed west? Yes, I am, Susan. I'm saying that there's a long history of the Columbia River. There's less of a long history for the Cascade Mountains, and there's even a more recent history of the Ice Age floods. Daniel, age 12. How did the Columbia River Gorge form? Did it formed during an ice age? How old is it? Daniel, I would say that the Columbia River Gorge began to form as we know it now 3 million years ago. And that's kind of at the same time that the Ice Age began, but the gorge did not form because of ice. It formed because of intense uplift of the mountains, and the river was holding its position against the uplifted ridge. Where is that petroglyph? It's on the Washington side. Can I think of it's a state park? Somebody help me here. Is it Columbia Hill State Park? It's across the river from the Dalles. I think it's Somebody help us with that? I think the name of the petroglyph is He Who Watches, or something like. You know that I'm motivated about learning Native American legends, mainly because I know almost zero at this point. Almost zero. Why are there Lake Missoula flood gravels on top of the Horseheaven Hills in Klickitat County? That's a similar question. I don't think those are Missoula flood gravels. In fact, I'm sure they're not. They're from an older time with, those are river gravels that predate the Ice Age. We've had Jim O'Connor up there a number of times surveying that, and I know there's weird stuff going on in Goldendale. It's a really exciting area, but there's a high water mark for that Ice Age water, and there's just no evidence for Missoula floods that high. I don't know if you know the other guy that asked the question or not. Are the Cascades still uplifting? Yes, they are. Of course, all these things happen slowly that we don't even know they're happening during our lifetimes. But we have good GPS evidence that those mountains continue to rise due to plate tectonic motion. Are there any active faults in the gorge? If so, are any visible? Thanks, John. The easy answer is yes. We will talk about the Seattle Fault on Sunday. And the Seattle Fault has many brothers and sisters all through the Pacific Northwest, meaning shallow crustal reverse faults. And we haven't studied them very much. And so they're probably more active than we realize, but we don't realize it yet because we haven't cataloged prehistoric earthquakes on each one of those faults yet. So if you ask me, there's many active faults throughout the Pacific Northwest, more active than many people realize. But that's easy for me to say. I don't have any data for that. And the only reason I even say it is because some of the prehistoric earthquakes we've been able to find on a few of those shallow crustal faults are shockingly young. And you can think an average of 10,000 years between magnitude 7 earthquakes on many faults through the area, including the Columbia River Gorge. What's my favorite spot in the Columbia River Gorge? It depends on my mood, I guess. I do like that area right across from the Dalles where that petroglyph is, and that place where there's a beautiful view of Mount Hood. This time of year, it's just perfect. It's like bright green carpets and wildflowers. Is it Columbia Hills? I think it is. Are the flood bars? I tend to like the dry side. I've grown to love the desert, and so I like the Dalles area more than I do the real heavily vegetated area on the other side of the Cascades. This is my personal choice. Are the flood bars with towns subject to landslides? YouTube Watcher 806, I don't think of the flood bars as being prone to landslides because they're big piles of gravels, but the piles are kind of broad. There's not steep slopes generally with those. So even though they're kind of a pile of marbles, I don't think there's a lot of sloughing. But up higher, where you have those tilted beds, that's when you either have real bad winters, everything's oversaturated, or you actually have some earthquakes. Was the uplift caused by subduction? Indirectly, Northwest Geology guy. As you have subduction of the Juan de Fuca plate beneath Washington in Oregon, you are not only doing this and making earthquakes and making magmas, but you're compressing over the long haul. You see my knuckle here? This is kind of the Cascades. Not only the Cascades have volcanoes with magmas, but there also is this kind of broad arching of these major anticlinal structures that Eric Cheney really likes to map. So I would think of it that way. Is the Columbia River Gorge a captive canyon like the Yakima Canyon? A captive canyon. Are you saying that there was stream capture to create the canyon? I'm not sure the Yakima River Canyon has a stream capture story to it, not that I'm aware of. And I'm not even sure I'm aware of that with the Columbia. I don't naturally put those concepts together if that's what you're saying, Elaine. A few more, because we're going to take our little walk for those that want to walk with us, if I can get the thing to work. Why so much more landslides on the Washington side and not on the Oregon side? Cheryl, if you have dipping beds, not flat, but dipping, and you have a river or valley over here, you basically have these rock layers that are like playing cards, and each playing card is ready to kind of slip off the rest of the slippery deck. And especially if those rock layers are basalt, but in between the basalts you have slippery clays. The phrase that one geologist used long ago, and they continue to use it, is that it's like Washington side is like a well-greased skid board. And the bedrock geology is just ready to go. And so it's like, why doesn't the Oregon side do that? And the answer is those same layers are on the Oregon side, and those playing cards are not slipping because the geometry is wrong. The hole is over here, and we're not going to have layers slip in that way. She who watches, thank you, that's it. How much widening of Wallula Gap occurred? Bruce Bjornstad has probably an excellent answer for that. I would wild guess that the Ice Age floods widened Wallula Gap by half. Like it used to be like this, and now it's twice as wide. Maybe more than that. I filmed a video that never saw the light of day, and we visited Wallula Gap, Sentinel Gap, Union Gap, and Sela Gap in the Yakima area. And the two river gaps that didn't have Ice Age floodwaters were pretty narrow. And Sentinel and Wallula were just so wide. It was just so dramatic to go from gap to gap and see so it's maybe more than half, again, as wide. Horse Thief Lake area. Thank you, Bill. Cluster of earthquakes under Mount Hood recently. Should we get earthquake insurance? I don't feel comfortable giving you advice on what to get insurance on, Susan. There are regular earthquakes underneath all of our Cascade volcanoes, and those earthquakes show us when magma is moving a little bit. We have experts who are monitoring those magma bodies. They're not suppressing data. They're sharing all the earthquake data, all the regions, and there's no cause for alarm. And those of us that are particularly anxious see a report of some magma moving and we're ready to lose our minds, but there's been that kind of swarm of activity regularly for the decades that we've been monitoring those magma systems. Has there been any evidence, where did it go? Has there been any evidence of a glacial erratic being moved in more than one flooding event, such as being rafted to a location in a first flood and then washed to a second location in another event? Excellent question. Seems likely, doesn't it? But I don't know how you would prove that. I just don't know what you would what kind of field evidence you'd have. But seems, why not? Sounds like a good idea to me. A couple more. Why are they reverse faults instead of normal faults? Asked Daniel, age 12. I think it's age 12. That part of the Northwest is being squeezed because of Northern California moving north and getting closer and closer to Canada. Plus we have the Juan de Fuca plate coming at us from the west. So we don't have normal faults generally in the Pacific Northwest because we're not relaxing the crust like Nevada, we're squeezing the crust, and we have earthquakes from both of those situations. Did the floodwater reach the parking lot of Crown Point? Thank you, Matt. I seem to hear both. Like Crown Point is where that Vista House was. You saw that photo of that beautiful 1915 viewpoint. It's still there. There's a nice parking lot, and a lot of people stop there and take pictures. And I have heard some geologists kind of casually say that the biggest Missoula flood coming down the gorge, the water was up to that parking lot. I've heard others say not quite that high. So I've never taken the time to really be careful with the numbers. Maybe there's a geologist here who can say something definitively here in the next couple of minutes before we take our walk. Are you familiar with the mouth of the Columbia? Was it further north in the past? In the Ice Age, James, the mouth of the Columbia was further west because global sea level was lower and there was more of a continental shelf exposed. But I think you're asking about that northern turn about the Columbia River itself. When it goes past Portland, it does that big swing to the north. I think there's a story there, but I don't know the story yet. It might involve some strike slip faults. If anybody who knows the details of that, I'd like to do something with that. Much of what I make programs on is based on how often people ask the same question. And a lot of people ask about that turn north of the Columbia River. Okay. Beacon Rock was a cinder cone volcano. I'd like to do a new program on the cinder cones of the Pacific Northwest. From Goldendale to East Portland and beyond, down to Bend, there's just hundreds of these small volcanoes that are made out of cinders, like popcorn, just piles of popcorn, with kind of a dense volcanic vent inside. And in the case of Beacon Rock, there was a cinder cone volcano that happened to form right in the middle of the Columbia Gorge, and it was mostly this cinder, this popcorn of Beacon Rock. So Beacon Rock used to be taller, it used to have all the cinder. All the popcorn's gone. A big Missoula flood came through, probably a series of them, swept all the popcorn, swept all the cinders away, and just left that volcanic vent, that volcanic neck that we now call Beacon Rock, 57,000 years old. I told you, man, there's a lot of cool stories in that particular area. Okay, it's 7:15. That's enough, I think. I'm sorry if I missed your question. especially if you are a young viewer. I appreciate you watching, and I appreciate you typing or having your parents type for you. I try my best to get your questions, but can always try next time, I guess. A toast to you. I kind of liked the sound of this last night, so I want to do it again tonight. Hey, I still got some milk duds in there from last night. Sweet. Actually, I kept finding milk duds on the floor out here. You know, I'd step on one and I'd pop it in. Here's to your health through this trying time for all of us, and the health of your extended family and all the friends and hard workers in your community. And I hope that you enjoyed tonight, and I hope that you'll enjoy us again. I hope that you'll join us again sometime. Speaking of which, I won't see you tomorrow night. Tomorrow night is Friday night. I will see you, if you want to join us, Saturday morning at 9 p.m. Pacific. Saturday morning at 9 o'clock a.m. Pacific time here on the west coast of North America. Mima Mounds. If you're viewing from a different country and you've never heard of these, I think you'll be interested. Nobody knows how they formed, but we'll talk about them anyway. And Sunday morning, 9 a.m., we'll go to Seattle specifically, talk about the Seattle Fault, talk about great earthquakes and tsunami deposits in Puget Sound. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll see you next time. I love you. Still here? Okay. So this will be the test. I'm in the house. I'm using wireless. I'm still looking at you. Unfortunately, you have to look at me a little while longer. We'll go get the Birkenstocks. And sit in the rocker. Got to be patient with me now, okay? All right. So I'm going to swipe you away and try to get on to data and get off the wireless. And then I hope I don't kill the live stream. Okay, so I'm going to freeze probably for a second. Okay. Are you with us? I'm on data, 100%. Yes, okay. Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks for the wine, Cheryl. We're still enjoying that wine. Okay, I got to get you into the gizmo. The gizmo's on. Okay. All right. So before I start, yeah, okay, Dale, you're going to puke. So I think that's I'm done with all that. The last thing I need to do is have you look out the back of my camera, but I still want to make sure we're focusing we're working right now. So I'm going to hold right here until I get some feedback from you. Are we live? Can you hear me? Can you see me? Even though you don't want to look at me anymore, and I don't blame you. We're doing okay? Delay in the comments. Okay, good. So there you go. Okay. I'm going to ask one more time. Are we functional? Yes and yes, Russell? Okay, good. All right, I'll just give you a little. Patrick wanted to see the house. Oh, shit. Sorry. So here's our normal area with our chalkboard. You can see why we didn't have room to set up our chalkboard. But these guys, I think that's fresh paint right there. And it was pretty nasty before. I don't know if you really saw it before. Anyway, seems like we're working okay. Have you missed the frogs? There's the frogs. I'm getting like a, hang on now. There we go. There we go. Okay, let's take a walk. Might be a little bit of a light breeze to get in your ear holes a little bit. Well, it really does like to track on stuff. I keep forgetting about that. Up. Thank you. All right, we'll see if we have a view, and you probably want to see something new. So I guess we need to figure out what we're going to do once we get to our viewpoint. That's all you've done with us before. Gizmo seems to be working okay. Slightly out of focus. Well, Colin, you're going to have to figure that one out on your own. You are going to hurl here, Dale, because I keep playing with these buttons. Oh, we got Mount Stewart out. Now the real test, can I zoom once we get up there? Oh, it's a perfect night. So things have leafed out quite a bit since your last time up here, if you were with us last time. All right. So, the big moment. He hits the trigger, holds on the trigger, and tries to zoom. Uh-oh. God darn it, I still can't do it. Thought I looked at that video tutorial that was real brief that Mike sent. You know, I could read the manual, but that's no fun. Who the hell wants to read a manual? Well, you can see Stewart better than you could last time we tried this, but gosh. Is it that? No. All right. Well, I'll give you a little. So that's the Kittitas County Fairgrounds. We have a big rodeo every Labor Day weekend. Who knows if we'll have it this year. In the distance, you can see a nice, beautiful, jagged profile. That's the Stewart Range. That's 93 million year old granite that was created in Mexico. Believe it or not. We'll send you right into the sun. We still got time before the sun goes down. Okay. I guess we'll walk another couple blocks since I haven't been able to come through for you at the Zoom. I'll do my homework, I promise. I thought for sure that was going to work. So this is a regular route. We'll have another view from the city park up here that we'll go to. And there's some older folks who live in the area that I like to go walking with, and they tell me stories of the olden days. Like such and such built that house, and this is where the edge of town used to be once upon a time. And I don't know about you, but I love all that kind of stuff. Good Lord, I've gained a lot of weight. Look at my shadow here. Oh my Lord. COVID-19, what the heck? You can bury me in a piano case. I promise I'm not that huge. I'm pretty big though. I'd like to read your comments while we're walking, but I think I'd fall flat on my face if I did that. Oh, here's Mary. Hi, Mary. Oh, wow.
But I did it.
They interrupted your walk.
Oh, no, I'd rather be listening to one of your talks.
Oh, thanks. Bye. So I assume this is looking as stable as, I assume it's as stable for you as it is for me. And I have no idea the mechanics of this. Pretty impressive. That's right. We'll go up here and look down on the rodeo grounds, and that'll be our destination for tonight. Still have quite a few of you with us. I feel like I should be tap dancing at the same time or something, but this will have to do. Sorry for the crazy pants, but you got a rookie driver here. God dang it, here we go. This is a city park that's pretty much like it was in 1947. There's no sidewalks, there's no bike paths, so you're forced to walk and dodge traffic. But you don't need editorializing now, do you? It's a very popular park, and I think you'll see why in a second, if you haven't figured it out already. And we feel lucky to live in a town like this with nice people generally. I hope that you live in a nice town with nice people. Yeah, part of the reason for going on the walk is just the quality of the light, you know. You get a night like this, I'm sure you've had many moments like this where you just catch that golden hour and it feels like you're walking through a movie set. Even if there's knuckleheads that you encounter. And I include myself as a knucklehead quite often. I could not yield to this car and I could make a big scene up here, but I guess I don't feel like it. They're just up here enjoying the drive, enjoying the view. You're gonna give me a little room though, aren't you, buddy? I think I had that kid in class, so they're probably trying to run me down because I gave him a C+. Well, this is the old Legion building, the American Legion. Go up here and tip back a couple Miller Lights. will come right down to the fence so I can kind of stabilize myself. Yeah, so this is a town that has a tradition of a cowboy culture that may seem strange to many of you, but we're approaching the 100th year of the Ellensburg Rodeo, and there's a county fair at the same time happening in this area, and it's a happening place. And so it's one of the pro rodeo events. You know, they do Cheyenne, they do Calgary, they do Ellensburg. Like, we're a dinky town, but yet we're a big deal in the rodeo world. So I think if you're a rodeo fan, you know about Ellensburg just for that reason. And then this is Craig's Hill that you can kind of see that has some interesting river deposits inside of it and some ash. And that's Nanum Canyon straight ahead. There's a big notch that you can kind of see. I'd love to zoom for you, but not to be tonight. So that's an interesting canyon. Oh, what the heck? You want to go another 5 minutes? We can see a bunch of teenagers smoking pot. Liz and I walk up here and they all give us the eagle eye, and then they go, "Oh, hi, Mrs. Zentner. How are you?" So they kind of melt away because it's their favorite science teacher. Hello. Oh, I can smell pot already. I'm doing this mainly for those of you who have been trapped in your shoebox apartment for many, many weeks, and maybe this is a chance to just... That's why I'm enjoying Itchy Boots so much, and Noralee with her travels, even though she's not traveling right now. It's just a fun way to travel. I just miss traveling, and maybe you do too. So this is a road trip for you. Oh. If things get awkward, I just need to say Mrs. Zentner, and then things will be fine. And then if that doesn't work, then you guys got to cover me, okay? This might get ugly. Just kidding. Let's pretend we're looking at stuff. Oh, good. That gives me an idea. Oh, this phone really wants to just stick with a certain image, and it just locks onto it. It won't let go like a Rottweiler. Oh, muffler board. We got muffler. God dang it. Come on here. Go that way. It doesn't want to look at the water tower. I don't know why. How's it going?
He's right there.
So this is where a lot of the muffler boys go, because there's muffler girls. And just sit up here for hours and then drive the circuit and then come back up. Probably think I'm the cops now. Remember what the secret word is. Mrs. Zentner. How's it going? Can't remember her name. Well, you know what? I just had a crazy idea.
What's up, vlog?
Yeah, man. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Oh, just you characters up here.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's good to see you. That wasn't the crazy idea. Here's your reward if you're still with us. We still have almost 600 people. Didn't occur to me till right now. I think there's a chance that I can show you some Mount St. Helens ash from 1980. And the shocker for you, if we can find it, is how much loess is on top of Mount St. Helens ash from 1980. Which gives you a sense of how much loess is in the air even today. And when I show you this, you're going to be like, are you sure that's Mount St. Helens 1980? It's like, absolutely. Eyewitness accounts. So that's how we'll finish this. Still got Stuart, kinda. There was some ash in the back of that car. Yeah, that would have been bold. I would have said, hey, you kids, you're altered right now, but how about a field trip? You want to walk over and look at some Mount St. Helens ash? Huh? Do you? Get lost, old man. So I used to take Geology 101 students all the way to the top of this hill. We'd just walk it from campus. But we changed it because there's other things that are more exciting than that. I hope there's some sun on it. It's going to work better if we can get some sun. So I'm on top of this this hill. Oh, here's some dude bros. Oh, check this out. See these guys? I can't zoom. I forgot. So there's dirt track, jumping on your dirt bikes. Wholesome fun, one would think. Not wholesome. No, you want to have fun, right? You don't want to be wholesome about it. All right. So they put the railroad in here in the 1880s, and to do that, they cut into this hill. Oh, are we going to have light? Hang on. So you see where they put the track in, and now they pulled the track back out 100 years later, so it's public land now. People run on it, but it's gravel. It's not that fun. But this is all loess. I got to figure out where I am here. This is all loess on top of this hill. So let me get your bearings here. So you're still looking north. Across the tracks is a continuation of the hill, but most of the loess has been taken away. It's been years since I've been up here, but I'll bet we can find it. And this is very steep, so I promise I'm not going to fall to my death. Oh, god dang, here it is. So this is all loess. This whole, I'm going to hang on to this wire. I'm not going to fall. Don't be worried now. So this is an incredible cliff face with nothing but loess. And when the light is a little bit better, actually, let me go over here. You can see some old Cascade volcanic ashes that are in the bank. Is this going to work? Yeah, can you see in the foreground there's kind of a faint white streak? It's in the shadow. That's an ash that's been collected. I think it's, I forget the dates, like back 13,000, 17,000, 21,000 years old. So that's not St. Helens, but St. Helens is going to be in the shadow here. I'm going to get down on my knees now. Don't make a joke, please, because I don't want to fall. Oh, I'm on one knee, baby. I can't zoom for you, but that's St. Helens. And I can come down here without falling. That's St. Helens. I'm going to come down, grab some of that. I got mostly loess. Try it again. You're getting out of the gizmo. Okay, I'm pounding the gizmo off. Okay, that's off. So you're worth it. I'm going to get on my belly, and that means I'm not going to fall down this face. And I'm going to hold the phone with one hand, and I'm going to get down and get some of that ash out of the bank with the other. But I got to get on my belly to do it. Here we go. Okay, Daddy's on his belly, holding the phone with my left hand. So this, you can get my hand for scale now. So this is easily a foot of loess that has blown in since May 18th, 1980. I mean, we're coming up on the 40th anniversary of this ash falling out of the sky. And I've already shown you Mount St. Helens ash in that little vial. But it's still ash. It's a fine powder. It's not the ash that Jim sent us from Ephrata, which was coarser. How's the focus here? So this is the stuff that fell out of the sky on Sunday morning, May 18th, 1980. And then if we swing over and look at the rest of the bank, maybe you can see that there's some other layers of volcanic ash that fell out of the sky hundreds, thousands, more than 10,000 years ago, all on this bank. So time capsule's right here, and you're like, don't take it, that's valuable. Well, it's a layer that goes all the way, we go on these trips and the students are always like, don't take it, don't hurt it. It's like, it's a layer of ash. It's not just a stripe here, it's like a plane. So, we can dig away, and there's plenty more where that came from. Okay, don't drop the phone over the edge. Okay. So I want to thank you for joining us tonight on top of Craig's Hill in downtown Ellensburg, Washington. I really appreciate all the generosity just by you being here and being so positive. And I know we've had our fair share of people who show up and are, what do you call them, bots or whatever. But yeah, I don't want to monitor all that. If we don't have problems on a regular basis, then we'll just deal with it. I think I saw a couple comments that there was something like that going on tonight, but we'll just keep it organic and as simple as possible, and we'll kind of run from there, okay? So I don't have my watch on, but I'm sure we're incredibly late, and I hope I didn't hold you up from doing something more important, but I'm signing off now from Ellensburg, Washington, and I want to thank you for being with us for so many times. And we'll see you Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. Mima Mounts. You gotta love it. Goodbye. I love you.